Yep, just a second. We have another camera issue. I'm not sure why, but that camera just does not want to stay focused. That's big. Woo, let's see if we can take that down a notch. There we go. That's better. Yeah, not sure why it keeps on changing, but we'll live with that. Let's update our Azure Data Studio. Welcome to Office Hours with DBATools. That's who I am, and we're going to take any questions you have. We don't have any questions in PollGab, so if you need to ask a question, please go to the room in the chat and ask the question there. We'll watch for those as we go. Really, today is going to be all about doing things with PowerShell, not necessarily DBATools, but with SQL PowerShell. I'm just going to go through some of the things that we're going to go cover in the next few weeks. I've sat down and we have a lot of topics that people want to hear about, and it's fair that we have lots of topics that people don't ask about, but things that I use almost every day, or things that I use somewhat every day, I think, in the DBA world. And that means that they're fair game when we start talking about things that we want to use or want to do in our world. Let's fix this up here. There we go. Perfect. And we'll do a new notebook. And really, I think we're going to leave this notebook alone for now. We're going to actually go back to, there's Azure Data Studio there too. We're going to go back to a web page, and we're going to go into, I was researching some SMO stuff, which I'll share you in a minute. But the reality is that there's a lot of things that we can do with modules, with PowerShell itself to get data from Windows. But today our focus is going to be on SMO. So we're going to go here first, and we're just going to illustrate some things that we can do with the SQL Server module. So SQL Server module, let me just do this, PowerShell. Because today we're going to talk about SQL Server PowerShell module because we've talked a lot about the DBATools module. And the DBATools module is a great module. And there are a lot of things it can do. And it does much more than the SQL Server module. I just want to illustrate first that there are two versions of this SQL Server module. One is SQL PS. SQL PS is the module that ships with SQL Server and actually runs in the context of the PowerShell job step. So that's fun. It was deprecated in June of 2016. That's kind of old. We're 7 years past that point. So it's a 7-year-old baby. They haven't done any modifications or updates or things like that. Maybe some security, but I don't think so. It's still SQL PS. And it used to be that when you right-clicked on anything in the databases realm or anything like that and said start PowerShell, that it would run the SQL PS module. And now it runs the SQL Server module. You can see the title is SQL Server PowerShell. And in this view, you can see that it has the SQL Server drive, and we're in PS. But if I say get dash module, it has actually the SQL Server module, not SQL PS. So Management Studio, this is 19. 18 does the same thing, but basically they have made the PowerShell in here to use the SQL Server module and real PowerShell. If we were to go back in there, we would see that PS version table actually shows that it is 5.1. So it is a Windows 10, Windows 2016, 2020, 2019, 2022 version of PowerShell. So instead of using a little mini shell, it used to have, there's a SQLPS.exe that used to run, and that was the mini shell. So now we can actually create a job. And if we created a new job here, test job, and we're going to say steps, we're going to start the new step. And the new step basically gives you the ability to say, I want to run PowerShell. Now, PowerShell can be run as a proxy account instead of just a SQL Server agent account. But the big deal about this is if you're in 2019 and above, I have a blog post out there that talks about how you use that. We'll go there in a second. But there is a command that is $sign NoSQL PS $. What that does is it takes this job step in 2019 and above, and I'll show you where we look at that. So DBATools.com on my blog, it basically has a thing here that says NoSQL PS. And if you put NoSQL PS, oh, I put the extra command there here. Sorry, it's only on the front. NoSQL PS is the command. And when you choose PowerShell and NoSQL PS, if you say get module, you will see that it doesn't run any SQL PS module. It actually runs PowerShell alone. This takes it so that it doesn't run PS, because if you let SQL PS run in this job step, you can't run import module SQL Server. Now, well, you can, but it conflicts a lot with lots of things, and it won't be good. So with NoSQL PS in the front of your job code, you could put PowerShell in here, and it will actually let you run SQL Server module instead of SQL PS and have modern stuff. So it's very important. This is the documentation page. It basically lets you see that, and it is right here. It's NoSQL PS. So it's right here, and it says this section applies to scripts executed the PowerShell and not the SQL agent. The new module can be used with the SQL agent job steps using #NoSQL PS. So that's the documentation page that lets you see that. But the basic principle is that when you want to run SQL Server and you want to run SQL Server module, you can now, because the SQL PS will not be loaded. So now you don't have to conflict. And if you run the step in here, if you just run this and say get module, you'll see in the job step output that it will have the data that says, oh, there's no SQL PS module in there. Okay, so nice short blog post, but it does work. Now, the other thing to remember is that SQL PS has to ship with SQL because the job steps require it for now. Now, 2022, I have not tried this on 2022, but the goal for myself, for the SQL team, is that they no longer require this NoSQL PS. They just don't do it. They just don't make SQL PS a thing, right? Just get rid of it. And then they don't have to ship it. Once they stop shipping it, unless you have it on your machine, and you can see, I'll prove that it is on your machine. If I say get dash module, list available, SQL PS, you will see, oh, you little gunky. Let's go into Windows PowerShell here. Get dash module, list available, SQL PS. It says it's not even here, so I'm not sure where it ends up because I don't have SQL installed on this box. So let's go back into our place here. We're going to enter PS session. prod-SQL1. And we're going to be in prod and then say get-module, and we'll make this bigger so you can see it. Module, list available, SQL PS. And you'll see that it is installed. Version 16, it has exported commands, but look where it lives. Under the Microsoft SQL Server directory in Program Files x86. So on a SQL Server, this is still installed. What I want to see is it's no longer ever there. So SQL Server installs. The agent doesn't require this NoSQL PS, and then we just get SQL Server. So that's cool. The reason why this is important to understand is because in this particular case, the SQL Server module, everything you do returns an SMO object. So if you do get-SQL login, it will always be a SMO login. If you're inside the provider like this, everything that comes out of the provider. So we're in Databases Admin Monitor. We see assemblies. We see certificates. We see defaults and extended properties, and all these file groups, and all these things. Everything I get out of here is going to be an SMO object. So let's go into SQL file groups. File groups. There's only one. So I'm going to primary. And I'm going to get the item. So primary equals get-item, period. So just get me this item that I'm in, my primary. And primary.getType is a, look at that, it's a file group and it's an SMO named object. So everything in the provider here is actually an SMO object. That sets us up to go back and look at what SMO can do. So I illustrate this because one of the sessions upcoming in August will be all about the SQL Server provider and how we get it and how we use it. But for now, what we want to do is we want to go back into our Azure Data Studio, maximize this guy, and we want to create a new file. Whoops, not a new query. Sorry, my bad. New file, and we'll choose PowerShell. And we're going to start diving into PowerShell. So here's PowerShell. It starts the PowerShell extension. We're just going to let it use it. We're not going to do an update of 7.0 yet. So we're going to get this get dash, PS version table. PS version table. PS version table is 7.3.4. So we're going to actually run a PowerShell Windows, or PowerShell. Nope, that's not it. I want Windows PowerShell. Let's configure terminal settings. That's not it either. We're going to choose a different shell. Windows PowerShell default. Here we go. So now we're in PowerShell. This is PS version table of 5.1. That's what we want for now. All right, so SMO. What the heck is SMO? We call it SQL PowerShell, but really, does PowerShell have a connection into SQL? The only way PowerShell has a connection into SQL is by using .NET. PowerShell is built on top of .NET, and .NET actually has a class called the SQL connection class in the system.data.SQL client namespace. It also has Microsoft.data.SQL client namespace, and depending on which one you use, it depends on which options you have. But the reality is I don't want to be writing code to do a connection string. I just want to connect to a database server. And that's why DBATools and SQL Server are great, right? So if we went back into our command prompt here and said get-command module SQL Server, there is a SQL Server command object that lets me get a SQL connection. So get-SQL instance. And the get-SQL instance lets me get an instance variable back. So let's do get-SQL instance. Oh, let's get out of prod SQL1. So we'll exit out of there. Now we're back into our normal world. And we're going to say get-SQL instance, and the version, or the name of the parameter here is server instance instead of SQL instance. They did consciously do that. Prod-SQL1, SQL01, and look what I get back. Come on, you can do it. We'll look at some other commands here. Invokes, lots of invokes. Invoke SQL CMD, invoke SQL assessment, and invoke SQL vulnerability assessment scan, blah, 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 blah. Get -SQL database, that's nice. Get -SQL login, that's great. Get -SQL agent and agent job, that's great. Enable SQL always on, backup a database, add a SQL firewall rule. So lots of good stuff here. And I'm not sure why this is being a pill. Let's go back into here. prod-SQL1, SQL01. I'm supposed to be able to get my instance here, people. Weird. Yeah, it's not supposed to work that way, so I apologize for this not working today. I am in a different way. I'm in a different command window, so let me do. This is just Windows PowerShell. So we could be. This is the other one. That's the SQL PowerShell one, and we don't care about that one. We'll exit out of this one. So I'm not sure why we can't connect here, because we should be able to say get -SQL instance, and it's supposed to give me my SQL instance, and it is not being very. Oh. That is 21 dot. Oh, let's get out of here. Let's go back into here. Since it's PowerShell anyway, and it's real PowerShell, we'll start PowerShell here. And we'll make it bigger so we can see it. And we'll go back to our instance. Oh, we'll just do C drive. So get module, and we see that we have a SQL Server module, and it's 22.059, so that's what we want. We want that version. If I say get -SQL instance here, SQL's our server instance, prod-SQL1 /SQL01. I should just get it. Yeah, that's so I was in limbo, and that was not good. So I see that I'm on RTM 16, so that's 2022. I'm on CU2. And there's my host. So I know what I get and when I get this out. But the interesting part is if I get this into a variable, instance equals get type, you'll see that it is a server and it is a SQL SMO object. So I get an SMO object by doing get SQL instance. In DBATools, it would be connect-DBA instance, and you'd pass a SQL instance in. So it's a nice thing. But the reality here is that I'm playing with SMO. So here's the deal. When you're playing with SMO, you have the option to do a lot of things. And most people go, I have no idea what SMO is. How do I even use that? So first off, for a database, we're going to say smo.database. And doing an smo.database lets me find out, oh, look, the smo.database class. We're going to do server as well. But database comes in and says, I'm an SMO object. I come out of this assembly. And I have namespace of this namespace. And that's great. And the version that comes out is version 1.6.0. Now, they do have a page in the NuGet.org. There is a package called SMO. Microsoft.SQLServer.SQL Management Objects is the package. And what you'll find out is that, look at that version, 1.7.0. Now 1.7.0 is already out because 16 was baked and sent with things, and we have a redistributable package. This is the redistributable package that we can do ourselves. We can take it and put it in our own folder and use it as redistributor stuff. And the key here is that we now have the option of doing all the things we want to do in 17 instead of 16. Now the reason most often is because 16 had to get out the door and they didn't finish all the features that came in 16 and 2022, and they needed to add them, such as things like contained availability groups. Is contained is a property on an availability group, right? So, okay, that's interesting. So in light of that, they needed to fix that. So they released 17.0, and 17.0 does have a property of is contained on the availability group. At least I think it does. I think I bugged it. But again, what I would do is I'd go in here and I'd go against an availability group. I would get the object of an availability group, and then I would find out if it has it. So let's try to do that. So I'm going here. I've got SMO on here. Let me see if I can remember how to get the assemblies here. Current domain, get assemblies. Select or sort full name, select full name. I knew it. It's not current domain, it's just current. Current domain without parentheses, because it's not a function, it's actually a property. So current domain, get assemblies. But when I come down here and see, I see this SQL Server Management PS provider, but then look at the SMO stuff, SMO 17.100. When you see the .100, you'll know it's a redistributable. And that's the only way Microsoft is distributing them now. They are not putting them in the GAC. The global assembly cache was a thing where you went into, and sometimes you'll find them there. Sometimes you'll go into the C Windows assembly, and you'll see this GAC MSIL. That means it's platform independent, 64-bit, it's x86, so 32 or 64, it doesn't matter. But notice that when I scroll down here, there is no Microsoft.SQLServer.SMO. None. Nowhere, because I installed Management Studio. It used to install them in the GAC. No longer. All of the DLLs that come with Management Studio are actually in its own folder. So now I can take these SMO DLLs and I can do lots of things with them. One, I can do this. AG equals new object, type name, Microsoft.SQLServer.SMO.availability group. Now I have an AG. Now I really don't have an AG, I just have an AG object. And notice there's not much there, right? So there's nothing here. It's not connected to anything, but I can do an AG with a pipe to get dash member. And now look at all these properties that come out of here, right? So I don't, look at that. In 17, I see an is contained. In 16, I wouldn't have seen that. 16 wouldn't have had is contained, which is why we get 17 now. And it's baked a little bit more, and it contains things that point backwards. It always goes backwards, never goes forwards, because is contained may get removed in next version. So I don't rely on variables or properties here to be existing in the next version, but they always go backwards. Anything that is a property that doesn't exist before, like 2019 and 2017 and 2016, they'll just come back null. They just won't have any data in them. That won't be like true or false. It will be just no data. And the way I can tell is I do AG dot, I don't know why this window is doing that, but AG dot is contained. And you'll see there's nothing there. It is a true and false, but when it's not there, it's null. It just doesn't exist. I'm not connected to an availability group, so there's no positive or negative thing on is contained. But the big deal here is that there's lots of properties. There's methods like is express queue. Give me the if it's an express queue. Refresh, resolve, revoke, script out. The other one is fail over. So I could actually use this object to fail over. If I had an availability group, I could tell it to fail over. Execute with modes. All sorts of stuff if exists. All sorts of stuff that you get in methods. And then you get these two events, property change and property metadata change. Some people don't use those, and that's fine. In PowerShell, we're interested in getting changes or putting changes. Now, some of these methods will execute against an availability group. These properties will tell you about the availability group. Database replica states. And notice it has this. This is your data type. Microsoft SQL Server Management SMO Database Replica State Collection. And then it has replica states. Database health trigger. Is there one? Yes or no? Nope. Is it a basic availability group? Maybe. Get or set tells you whether you can read it or write it, or both. And there's just lots of things you can do. So understand that SMO is just a method to get to your SQL Server and do things with it. Now we did a instance and the instance has an instance in it. Okay, so that's nice. But what's in the instance? So let's do instance pipe get member. And you'll see that it has a lot of properties: version, version major, version minor. But some of these properties have things in them that you want maybe to know, maybe the service name. So let's do instance dot instance name, or server instance. Is that server instance? Server service name. And you'll see it's SQL01. Now that's because the instance is the service name, right? Service name is SQL01, MSSQL $, SQL01. If I want to know the instance, there's an instance property up here. And you'll see that it is SQL01. So these two look like the same thing. Interesting. But it has properties for the job server. This is a big object. The server object is huge. If you look at database, well, let's go to database. Database has some constructors, a few of them, fields, a few properties. I mean, there's quite a few properties, but look at the list and it's like, well, I mean, it's not a short list. Then you have some methods, and most of the methods are going to be the same, like create and not with server, but check tables and stuff. You're going to have DBCC options in these objects. You'll get those on the server object as well. But that's nice. But what if I go back to smo.server? The biggest difference between smo.server and smo.database is that there's a lot more collections. So if you think about this, there's a couple constructors. You have a server connection or a string for your connection, or you just use the name and connect with Windows authentication. It's fine. But look at the properties. You have availability groups. That's a list of things. That's what they call collections. So availability groups, that's a collection of availability groups. Audits, collection of audits. Backup devices, a collection of backup. So you have plenty of collections in this place, but it has a lot of stuff in it. Computer name, physical net BIOS. We know how to get that with server property, but that's what that is. It's executing server property for you and putting it in that property. So you don't have to get that. The biggest thing to know about SMO, which is the value of today, is that SMO is an option to manipulate things in SQL Server or to get properties. Now, the way it does that, most people think that SMO connects to the SQL Server and keeps a connection, and that is not true. There is no active connection to SQL Server. It logs in, it executes, and it logs out. Okay, so we're going to show you that just so you understand that that's the principle. So we're going to do a standard trace for the standard X event profiler, right? I don't need to use X. I don't need to use profiler, SQL profiler, because it's deprecated, number 1. 2, I don't need to use that. So I'm going to clear data here. We're going to set this up here, and we're going to get instance .databases.name. Okay, so we're just going to do that. We're going to clear this window, and I want to just show you what happens. So clear, run. Okay, whoops. A database says, sorry, my bad. Databases, and there's my names. Okay, I got them pretty fast. We'll go back up here, and we'll stop it. And what we're going to see here, I wish I could make it bigger, but I guess I can. Let's see if I already turned it on. Nope, I did not. So let's go back here and do demos. And I don't know why that's not there. Zoom it. I didn't think so. That's weird. Nope, I don't have it on this machine apparently. So we'll use this guy, and we'll just come back here. So the connection here, we're looking not for agent job manager, so we're not worried about that. We want us. So here's a select. Now what you won't see, we may have to do. Let's do a T-SQL one and see if it shows. But what we would see here is the login part. This has a log out. I'm not sure why this one has a login and log out. This is agent, so I don't care. But it doesn't show me logging in and logging out. which it should. So let's run this one and see if it shows me doing that. Now, what I won't see now is I won't see that actually doing it, because the problem with this is that whenever you run something in PowerShell here in SMO and you've already retrieved it, it won't retrieve it again. So I have to go out here, clear this window, go back here. And I don't think it'll give us what we want, but we'll do it. We'll do it anyway. ID. Here's my ID for everybody, right? So now I go back here, we stop the trace, and we look back here and see what happens. So the first thing it does is it comes in and logs in. Okay, and then it gets the username, it gets the Microsoft version number, it executes. This is the job log. This is the silly agent again. On 78, we want this one right here. Log in, and we get the username or the version. Then we get the username. That's still the agent. You little silly guys. Where's my little code? Let's go down here to the bottom. There should be a log in here. There's a log out. There's a log in. Nope. Let's do this. Basically what we're seeing is there's a lot of things that happen in here, but you can see the log outs and log ins. So SQL SMO doesn't ever keep a connection. And that's okay. That's totally okay. But understand that every time you execute a method or access a property that has not been retrieved from SQL, SMO generates the T-SQL command, sends it to SQL Server, and retrieves the data and populates this object that has these properties on it, and then logs out. When I do it again, it'll log in. It'll get my stuff. It'll log out. Now, if, in this case where I did name, it didn't do a thing. Well, because it was already populated. So my collection of databases already had the names. So why would it ask SQL again? What if I renamed a database on SQL? The database object in SMO wouldn't ask SQL again to get the new one. So then you'd have to do a refresh or create a new, or connect again to SQL, and then do the databases.name. So they would go retrieve the new name. So you do have some learning curves. I will go over more of those in another session of this, but I wanted everybody to see SMO is the underlying reason that DBATools is so cool and SQL Server module is so cool. Is SMO is under the covers doing that things. Management Studio uses SMO a lot. Why? Because it's an API. Why build a new way to get SQL, like collections and stuff? The big benefit of knowing it's a generator is when I run 17 against version 14, which is 2017, it will know that that feature didn't exist in 2017, so it won't generate the column name in the select statement. Select star from sys master files. Well, the server object may not do a select star. It'll do specific queries. And if that column doesn't exist in that version of SQL, then it will error, and that means the SMO will break. So the code inside SMO is literal. Select column name from blah, 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 insert into temp table, blah, blah, select join, what, and it comes back with your data. But it knows what exists in that version, and that's why it gets the MS version from SQL. It needs to know what version it's dealing with, what type. Am I Azure or am I not? That's important to this SMO library as well, because it might have to do different things when it connects to Azure as opposed to connecting to a SQL Server on premises. So SMO is smart. It knows how to determine what it needs to execute and what T-SQL it needs to generate so it can get you back the properties. It looks easy to us. You ever want to know, you can go back to your profiler or Xevent profiler and find out what commands are being executed. Yeah, this one we stopped. Yeah, that's right, we stopped it. So The biggest deal here is to understand, hey, what is my objects doing? What am I wanting to get back? PowerShell is something you'll have to learn. I use this syntax because PowerShell is a dynamic language. So databases is a container of databases. And a property of name is on each database. So it literally went and got the name property from every database and displayed its name without having to do a for each or anything else. It's just dynamic. That's what we did with ID. Databases.id. They all have IDs. So it just gave me the IDs. Done. Okay. So nice and cool, but I wanted you to see that before we got deeper into another set of PowerShell for SQL. And that's what you need to know about SMO in the beginning. We'll do more SMO at another date. Thank you for joining, and hopefully you will have a better time playing with SMO, having a little fun. It's easier to load with either SQL Server module or DBATools module because they embed the same assemblies as you would. They just do it for you when you import the module. There's other ways to do it. We'll talk about that another day, but SMO is your key. It exists in SQL Server and DBATools, and that's how you load it. DBATools has done something special. We talked about another day with DBATools library, but that's another way to load SMO. So with that on your mind, we will exit this session and wish you all a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. We'll catch you on another DBATools office hours.